Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Jaclyn. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm super pumped to have you. I don't even, to be completely honest with you, I don't even know how I stumbled onto your Instagram account.
Yeah.
Then I might have spent like 3 days binging your stuff because I was like, wow, all of your reels honestly are like perfect. Like the audio is good for them. Like the things that you've got like in the script, I'm like, man, she follow. And I'm like, wait, she's an anxious therapist. What?
Mhm.
Okay, so talk to me about, wait, hold on, before that. Let's let everyone know, who are you? What do you have going on?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Jaclyn, the anxious therapist. About, oh God, I don't even know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, kind of coined myself with this term because I'm kind of like we were talking about before the show, an oxymoron. Like, how does your therapist need therapy, right? Like, you have all the education and the resources. Like, what could you possibly, you're supposed to help other people. And so for the longest time, like, I denied my own mental health struggles because I've known that I wanted to be a therapist since I was 12 years old. So I was like,
Oh,
I can't go into the world and want to help people if I'm struggling. So it was just like, push all that stuff down, deny it, drink your way through it, right? And then I was sitting in a class in grad school and I was like, oh my God, I have that. As we are talking about anxiety disorders, I was like, that sounds just like me. And I just had this visceral, like, I just got goosebumps because I remember that moment so clearly. And that was eons ago. But I was sitting there and I'm just like, that's me. And so from there, I'm like, okay, you got to get your life together. Got my first like big girl job as a therapist, start doing the thing. And it wasn't until I was like being triggered by my clients and seeing myself in them, and then going to my supervisor at the time, being like, what's happening to me? Like, I'm having these like big reactions. I'm feeling too deeply for them. I can't disconnect. Right. And he's like, it's time. Like, you need to go to therapy. And so that was the first time as an adult that I sought therapy for myself. And it was liberating. It was amazing. And I thought, wow, if people can see that even a therapist can ask for help, like maybe they'll be inspired to go get the help that they need too. So I thought, I'm going to start sharing my journey. And that is how the anxious therapist was born.
I love that because I feel like it makes you that much more relatable and
Yeah.
you aren't shameful about like, oh, well, these are like the childhood ones that you post. I'm like, girlfriend, you are my kindred spirit. Like so funny. I mean, dark humor, funny, right? Like, oh my gosh, that's another thing that I really like about you.
Mhm.
But when you started sharing like the anxiety side of it, like, or even just saying like the anxious therapist, were you like, oh God, what is this going? Like, what are people
Yeah.
going to think?
Absolutely. I mean, I felt like a total imposter. I was afraid that people wouldn't take me seriously in this profession that I just spent 6 years through college and grad school. And then, it was like 3 more years before I even got licensed after that. So I've spent almost a decade like pursuing this, right? And now people aren't going to take me seriously because I struggle. I'm like, how can you help someone if you're struggling, right? And so
Right.
it was this barrier that I had to get over mentally because there have only been a handful of trolls, honestly, in all of my sharing that have come out of the woodwork to tell me, like, how can you be struggling if you're supposed to be a therapist? Everyone else is like, I would be concerned if my therapist didn't also seek therapy because
Yeah.
I want to know that you've been through some shit. And I'm like, well, I'm your girl because I've been through it and my whole life story is on blast on the internet for everyone to hear.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's a lot of relatability in that because it's easy when you can open a textbook and be like, oh, you have anxiety because you check all of the marks.
yep.
And here's what I think you should do. But not actually having been through that. Kind of like the same thing as a stepmom. Like it's easy to like say from the outside, like, oh, you're the stepmom, you should do this, this, and this. Well, that works great, like in a perfect like textbook world. But
Yeah.
unless you've been through it and like understand like
Right.
the crazy emotions that come with it, that seem super totally unnormal, like you don't
Mhm.
really get it. So I love that you, yeah, and your trolls are nothing, but the Muppets one like totally got me. Like, Oh my gosh.
I seriously am obsessed. That's the best insult I've ever heard. Like, I couldn't even be offended for even half a second because I'm like, you just called me a Muppet. Like, that was fantastic.
That is so hilarious. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you have no idea what we're talking about, so just like, I don't know, within the last month, maybe, like
Yeah,
your
for
Instagram
sure.
is like totally blown up.
Yeah.
And one of like a troll, like, I mean, it was crazy. Like it's still growing like crazy, which is wild. But the comment that you got was like you Muppet or something like that. And I pictured you as a Muppet, like with the mouth and everything, which just like made me laugh because I was like, oh, cool. You've got like the open
Yes,
mouth and the little tongue in there, all of these
absolutely.
things. I'm like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so to stay on target here, um, going through, so you said at 12 you wanted to become a therapist, and then you
Yeah.
kind of like drank your way through life because you shoved everything down. Can you talk us through that part of it and like how you
Absolutely.
got to this?
Yeah. So, I grew up in a blended family too. I had step parents. I still have a stepmom who is one of my best friends. We're so close. She's been in my life as long as I can remember. And I'm so grateful for my blended family and the way that things worked out. I had a really beautiful childhood, supportive, loving parents, and a lot of trauma throughout my life. And so that's something that I think people have a hard time grasping, just that concept of you can have had a really great childhood. Like I was the first and still probably am to defend my parents and be like, they were doing the best that they could. Absolutely. And I still was not getting all of my needs met. I was still being exposed to people in situations that I shouldn't have been, that caused literally a physical change in my brain that led to trauma, right? That I've now had to deal with as an adult. So, from my parents getting divorced and a lot of high conflict to my best friend dying by suicide when I was 12 to my almost a year to the date later, my grandma, who was one of my primary caregivers, passed suddenly from lung cancer. And then from there, I mean, I started drinking when I was 12, like socially with my family. And then it turned problematic by the time I was 16, 17. And I couldn't pick up alcohol without blacking out every single time. Like I have no, and that's still why I'm now proudly 3 years sober. One, the catalyst of having my first, getting pregnant with my first son, I was like, okay, obviously I'm getting sober because I'm pregnant. But after like, breastfeeding everything, everyone's like, you can have drinks now. And I'm like, I don't think I want to, like, whatever. Wasn't really sure about my sobriety until literally within the past year did I finally like say to my husband, like, I think this is forever. And he said, I know. And like he knew before I did that I was
I have
never going
goosebumps.
back to it. Like I will never, I come from generations of alcoholism. I cannot, like my kids are already getting it in their DNA. So
Mhm.
environmentally, it's really important to me that they're not exposed to it. So I spent, all of my college years, like I failed classes after being like a 4.0 three-sport athlete in high school. I was now failing college classes. I was partying like literally 4 out of 7 days a week. It was absolutely out of control. It was horrendous. And at the time, it just felt like I'm the life of the party. Everyone wants to be around me. Everyone thinks I'm having a good time. We weren't paying attention to the fact that it was problematic. It was college. It was, there was excuse after excuse. And like we were talking about before the show, right? Like alcohol is the one drug that you can consume copious amounts of and no one thinks twice about it. If I were doing like any other hard drug, it would have been like, she has a problem. We need to get her help. But because it was alcohol, it was fine. And the second I would say, like, I think I need to like pull back a little bit. Once I was in my mid 20s, I would go 30 days here and there of being sober. And then I would kind of just use that as justification to, oh, see, I can be sober for 30 days. So now let me turn it back on, go party. And then when it feels like it's getting out of hand, I'll do another 30 days kind of thing. And it was just this prove to myself I can be sober so that I'm not an addict, right? And then that just justified me continuing to drink more and more and
So it's this vicious cycle, right?
more.
And then yeah, so we talked about like how you can just drink whatever you want as far as alcohol goes, and like no one says anything. But the second you say that you're not drinking, what
Yeah.
happened?
Oh my gosh. Everyone's like, don't give up on life memories. It's you don't have a problem. We all drink a little too much now and then. I mean, I'm like, why are y'all fighting so hard for this? This is weird, right? Like, if this was literally anything else, even if it was like weed, people would be like, you can't just get high every day, all day, right? But that's what I was doing with alcohol. And everyone, I think what happens with alcohol is when you talk about getting sober, it triggers something for other people that's an insecurity that they have. And so then they're like, no, you don't have to. Because if you stop, then that makes me question my drinking and that makes me uncomfortable. But if I just tell you it's okay, it's not that bad, everyone drinks too much every now and then. I'm like, you don't understand. Like, there are huge gaps that I'm missing where I have no recollection of things that I've done, things that I've said, things I've posted online, fights I've gotten into. It's like, why? Why are you encouraging me to live that way? I
Hmm.
really genuinely don't understand that perspective. And I think the only thing that makes sense is that it's triggering an insecurity for other people about their own drinking.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes for anything though, right? Like if you say that you're going to stop doing something or I'm going to start doing something, like if I
Mhm.
were to say to you, because I know that you work out too, like,
Yep.
oh man, I need to start running more or I need to start doing this, then there's always that sneaking like, oh, should I do more? Or, if I'm feeling a certain kind of way about something, like whatever my reason is for working out. Yeah. And I think that it's weird because if you stop doing something like that, if you stop drinking, you lose a lot of friendships,
Yeah,
right?
big
And
time.
I think that's a fallout that people don't talk about because then you start to like, wait, we were never actually friends in the first place.
Hmm.
I didn't I didn't realize that our relationship was only built on that or only built on like, oh, well, you're the life of the party and you like that's why people want to be around you. And it's interesting, like I love that you're talking about this because like I had said to you before we started recording, I've had so many different people on the podcast and we have talked about it. And they're like, but I don't, it's such a weird topic. Like, I don't want to talk about it because, maybe my family doesn't know, or I get a lot of pushback, or my friends don't know, or I'm like dabbling in it, like I'm sober curious, and I don't know that I'm ready to like commit to that, right? And I'm like, I totally get it. And everyone is on a different journey. And, I'm not going to shame you if you are sober. I'm not going to say shame you if you are like blackout drunk. Like everyone's
Yeah.
doing their own things. But I think the biggest misconception is that alcoholism is actually a disease.
Hmm.
And people are like, oh, it's just alcohol. Like, why don't you just quit? Right? Like you, like, oh, like I'm not an addict. Like I can quit for 30 days. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And when you talked about like the genetics and like passing it down to your kids, like it's already in their DNA. And it's, I don't know, can you talk about that? Like, I don't know how much you've like dove into that or like how much
Yeah,
you know about it.
absolutely. So we're always talking about the argument like nature versus nurture,
Mhm.
right? Like how much of why you are the way that you are is based on your DNA and how much of it is based on what you were exposed to. Like the twin studies, right? Where like one twin goes and lives with a different family than the other, and then they come together and they're 25 and they have the exact same mannerisms and they have the same interests and stuff, but they grew up entirely separate. Well, it's that predisposition to become a person based on just your genetic factors, right? And so I have a unique situation in my family where I have a cousin who was not raised at all, did not know his dad, but they are the exact same person. Their mannerisms are identical.
Not
And
wild.
you would assume that he grew up with him and he doesn't know him at all. They haven't, but I know both of them separately, right? And so it's very interesting because you can see the power of like my boys are going to have to receive a different level of education around alcohol and drinking because my husband has some on his side, I have it on my side, so that's already a double whammy in the genetics.
Mhm.
And then for if they're being raised around us partying and drinking and that's the norm, right? That's now just adding on another component that is going to make them more likely to struggle with alcohol themselves. And for me, I can't control that I pass it on to them in their DNA. Like, in order to stop that cycle, I would have had to choose to not have kids. But the thing that I can control is to not expose them to me drinking. Like, they will never see me have a drink. I will not, risk that. And so that's the one thing that I can control. And I think genetically that feels like a lot of pressure because I'm like, why is no one ahead of me? Like years, generations, why has no one disrupted this cycle until now? And it led to a lot of anger and resentment, but no one before me had the insider awareness that it was problematic. I'm the first person to look at it and look at my own drinking and say, this is not okay. Like I literally do not have an off switch. I'm not safe to drink. One of my favorite comedians, she was just talking about being sober and she's like, I'm sober because when I drink I don't have a prefrontal cortex. And she's like, and when I do drink, I'm the kind of person who needs like two prefrontal cortex. It's really not like, yes, like same. That's literally me because I can't that decision making, it just goes out the window. I have no ability to say no to situations that are dangerous or, threatening in any way or risky. Like I can't. I will subject myself to anything and everything. And there came a point where I'm like, the regret and the shame and the embarrassment that comes from that, let alone the physical aspect of what alcohol does to your body, what it was doing to my mental health alone. I was like, I literally cannot do this anymore. Why? Why am I fighting so hard for something that's literally like poison to me?
Hmm. Yeah. Can you like make it make sense? And so if you're
Mhm.
listening to this, I don't want you to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know Alicia doesn't drink. I really don't drink that much. I might maybe like on 1 or 2 days a week have a drink or two. Like I'm not like a big drinker
Yeah.
anyway, but I didn't grow up around it. My
Yeah.
mom would maybe drink twice a year, maybe. But
Yeah.
a lot of like when she would drink, so her like tolerance was really low. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking like as a kid, man, if she drank more often, like I would like her. Like we would be friends, right? Like
Yeah.
she wasn't so like uptight or so spun up. But so I didn't really, so then when I went to college, then I played sports in college too, but like on one of my teams there was a girl that was like in a really super religious, super strict house. Like as a senior in high school, she had to be in bed by 9 o'clock every single night, which was like wild to me. But
Yeah.
she just went bananas, like balls to the
Mhm.
wall, like drinking like crazy. And I didn't understand that. And I'm like, what is going on? And she was like, I was never allowed to do anything. And now I have like free reign to do whatever I want. So I like that you're like, their education on it has to be different, right? Because there's so many spectrums that you can have, but like understanding like the why behind things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just alcoholism is such a touchy subject. So I appreciate that you were like vulnerable enough to be like, hey, yeah,
Yes.
I will absolutely talk to you about this. Everyone's like on their own like healing journey and it's not linear and there's ups and downs and there's goods and bad days.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you were like, yeah, I can talk to you about that.
Of course. Yeah.
And
I
you will
love
have the conversations and like just
Mhm.
go against the grain or like you say like I will talk like let's have a dialogue, like let's talk about why you don't agree with me or why you don't want to talk about this, which leads me to one of your podcast episodes about an unpopular opinion with hard relationships and why those relationships are still good to
Mhm.
have. Talk us through that because I think you're right. So many
Yeah.
people are like, that's a hard relationship. And I 100% am totally guilty of this. That's a hard relationship. I tried for years to make that work. I can't keep subjecting myself to that. I'm
Yeah.
out.
Exactly. And we live in a time now where cancel culture is like very prevalent, right? And cutting people off is very prevalent. And I think that that comes from a lot of us were raised by, whether in our grandparents or our parents' generations, this idea that like family is everything and you don't question authority in your family, you do anything and everything for them, you become the caretakers when they're old, right? And now our generation and younger is starting to question that. Like, do I have to just subject myself to toxic family and I'd rather my life's easier when they're just not around. And I want to find somewhere in the middle, right? Like we don't have to just cut off everyone who makes our life difficult, but we don't also have to put up with their shitty behaviors and toxic patterns that they have not done the healing work on. There is a middle ground, and I like to encourage people to explore that because it's really easy to be like, this person's bad for my mental health, so I can't be around them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, not everything that's quote unquote bad for your mental health should be avoided. It's not just find the path of least resistance. It's how do I work through these challenges? Like, how do I grow as a person if I'm not ever having to face obstacles, right? And so a lot of us with a lot of trauma are like, well, I've already faced my fair share of obstacles. Like, I'm done, cut them all off. I'm done with it, right? But for me, it's how do I set better boundaries with these people? For so long, I focused on making them change. And in my childhood, begging people to spend time with me sober, begging people to be there and hold safe space for me and my big emotions, right? Like not shame me for being a sensitive child and explore what I was going through. Instead, I was rescuing everyone else. I was the confidant for the adults. I was the child having to go apologize because I misspoke and hurt an adult's feelings. And now I'm being shamed and they're crying to me about how bad I hurt their feelings, right? So, like, I understand complicated relationship dynamics. And as an adult, the kind of nice idea that it is to just cut them out. But when I look at these relationships now, what can control? And that's my boundaries. Okay. There's a big difference between boundaries and expectations. Expectations are not within my control. I'm looking at my family saying, let's say for me being sober, I expect that you don't get hammered around me, like, or that you wait until the evening to start drinking. Like, I come from a family of day drinkers. So, like my expectation would be that you do that, but I can't control that. My boundary would be if you start drinking, I'm going to remove myself, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a direct, like, well, you're drinking, so I'm leaving now. It's okay, well, I'm going to get going. So this was fun. See you guys next time, whatever kind of thing, right? We're getting it twisted in our brain because we have expectations of other people that aren't in our control. And so you're saying, I'm setting a boundary. I told them they can't drink around me. You can't control that. Your boundary has to be about you and how you handle the situation, right? So when you're talking about toxic family members or the aunt who always comments on your body at Thanksgiving or whatever, how are you going to handle the situation? Because I know I wouldn't feel good just cutting off my difficult family members. I've significantly reduced time with them. I've had buffers when I had to spend time with them. So, like, making sure my husband was there and supportive and he could say, hey, let's go do this when that person started that conversation or, whatever it might be. But I had to stop focusing on what everyone else was doing and trying to control their behavior because that's another trauma response, right? It's this notion, this false sense of security that I can control you. But that's an expectation. It's not a boundary. So I'm so sick of people telling me, like, I set my boundaries and they're not following them. Your boundaries have nothing to do with them. Your boundaries are only about you, right? You can't set a boundary for someone else to do or not do a thing. How are
Mhm.
you going to handle it if they do that thing, right? That's what we should be focusing on. And we're getting so tore up and just cutting people off because we have those two concepts of boundaries versus expectations mixed up in our brains.
Wait, so you're saying the only person I can control is myself?
I know. It's so frustrating, right?
Yeah. And I think
Uh,
you're totally right, though, because people do confuse the expectations and the boundaries. I 100% totally did. Like,
mhm,
before I knew the difference, I absolutely did. Because, like you said, my expectation is that you, since you came from a family of day drinkers, don't drink around me. But I know that I can't control you. Where for me, I was like, well, that's my expectation. So they better do that. If not, I'm out. Like, I'm leaving, like, whatever. But I like that you made the differential of like, this was my expectation, but this is actually my boundary. And I'm not a therapist like you are. Like, if it, wouldn't require me like going for another decade of school work to like do it, I totally would. I'm like, could totally nerd out with you about that. But
mhm,
it's understanding that boundaries aren't for that other person. And if you're setting them like that, they're always going to fail. Your expectations are always, because that's what they are, they're an expectation, and actually a boundary. You're always going to be let down. You're always going to feel resentful. You're always going to feel frustrated. I don't typically speak in absolutes, but this is one of those
mhm,
situations where that's always going to happen because
mhm,
that boundary is for you. And so I've talked to people about like, well, okay, so I set a boundary, an actual boundary, and they always violate it. And
mhm,
I tell people a certain thing, like, what do you say to somebody that says, well, I set a boundary with this person and they always violate it? Then what?
mhm. Exactly. Re look at your boundary because what are they possibly able to do, right? Like if let's say I have a parent who won't stop posting pictures of my child online, right? A grandparent, proud grandparent. So they come over and they just take a million pictures and I've asked them not to do that and maybe I'm uncomfortable with that, right? So if they come over and they're taking a bunch of pictures and then they go home and they post it, I might reiterate my expectation that, hey, we don't really want the kids blasted all over social media. Could you not do that? Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. They might agree, or I don't see what the big deal is. Da, da, da. They have their little banter. The next time that they come over, if I see them taking a bunch of pictures of my child, my boundary is to physically remove the child and say, I've asked you not to do that. We're not comfortable with it. Right. That's the boundary because I'm now stepping in and taking action. Okay. So where we're getting held up is I've expressed to them the expectation. And then what are you doing about it? Like you yourself stepping in, reiterating, saying something, removing you and or your child or whatever the boundary is about, right? Like that's the difference. Okay. So we're getting frustrated because you're like, I already told them once. You told them an expectation, right? So the boundary only has to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That like people cannot violate your boundaries without your consent short of certain like traumas such as like sexual abuse, physical abuse, right? Stuff like that, right? Because I could like try to remove myself and those things could still happen. But as like an adult in safe, secure relationships, right? Like your boundaries are about what you do in the situation, not about what the other person is doing.
Mm-hmm. And you know that this, like, let's use the grandparent situation. If you know that this person does this, it's cyclical. You know
Mhm,
it's coming back. So
mhm,
I always say to stepmoms when I'm coaching them, so you know that this is a person that crosses this boundary.
mhm.
What are you going to do about it the next time, right? Like you've got to go in with a plan and you've
Yeah.
got to practice it because it's
Yes.
going to come back. And so you're either going to freeze and do nothing and then be pissed about it because you're like, ah, I can't believe I didn't say anything. Well, when
Yeah.
you are in that situation and you feel like, all jittery, you more
Mhm,
chances than not, if you haven't practiced what you're going to do or say, you're
mhm.
not going to do anything. And then the cycle just
Exactly.
repeats itself.
Yes. Or if you don't have a partner who's going to help
Yeah.
buffer and set the boundary with you and, implement it, like it is going to be very difficult to navigate that. But people are creatures of habit. And so it is easy to practice because they're going to do it again, right? They're going to test it. It's like toddlers, right? They push us and push us and push us to figure out what they can get away with. And so it's our job to be consistent and constant with our boundary.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about if you've got a partner that doesn't necessarily agree with your boundaries or isn't like completely on board with
Yeah.
them? Like, how do you navigate that?
Absolutely. It's hard when someone is, you're very passionate about something and like you see this a lot with like in-laws, right? Like your in-laws you might be wanting to set boundaries with, but they're like, well, that's my parents. Like I'm okay with it and it's not that big of a deal. They've always been this way. Like that
Oh
person
my gosh.
adjusted to
The
their parents in
quintessential.
that way,
Yeah.
right? So you're coming in and you're kind of shaking things up. And a lot of people, I mean, our brains are hardwired to hate change. Like change is a potential threat. And so we're just wired to stay the same. And so when you're asking your partner to change, like it's more about holding safe space and being able to say to your partner, like, I know this is hard for you and this is important and I'd really like for you to have my back. So often in relationships, what happens is we don't get the cord severed to the partner's parents. And so this priority of our marriage hasn't taken the front seat yet because there's still the priority of like partner and their family, right? Versus like this is our family now. It's
Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
And we need to prioritize what's best for this little cohort that we've created. And so it's really about having empathy and understanding for your partner. Like you're probably asking something of them that they've not ever had to do in their life, while also reiterating why it's so important to you. But the kicker is your partner is probably going to challenge you, right? They're going to challenge that boundary that you're saying is so important. And that's a healthy part of a relationship. It's that dynamic to be able to say, hey, this is important to me. This is a boundary I'd like to put in place. You don't want or need a partner who's just blindly agreeing with you. You need someone who's saying, babe, that feels a little extreme. Like, it's okay if grandma posts pictures of him on Facebook. She has 5 friends, like it's not a big deal, right? It's okay for your partner to hold their ground a little bit. So often we go into a conversation and say, this is how it's going to go. And we've got the script planned out for our partner and they don't follow along. And then we feel so isolated and alone and you don't listen to me and it starts this big fight. It's like allow your partner space to challenge you and see if that is something that you both agree on and that needs to happen. Or if maybe you have this trauma response where you like to be in control and there's people around that you're not able to control and it's challenging you and you just need a safe space to explore that. Like use your partner for that then, right? So it doesn't always have to be like this knockdown, drag out thing. But if you're going into a conversation asking your partner to be open-minded about something and a boundary that you might want to set, you also have to be open-minded that that might not be a boundary that your partner's comfortable with. And I don't think that it's fair to ask our partners to just blindly have our back all the time without also saying how they feel about the situation.
I don't know why you had to call me out like that, but that is 100% verbatim how I operated at the beginning of our relationship. Like
Yeah.
straight. But before, actually, I guess we can get into that now. But it took me a lot of learning um, that it was a trauma response to
Mhm.
try to control the situation. And it is really wild that you can't actually control other people, but then you also can't make other people control other people too, if you can believe that, right? Like,
I
isn't that
know.
crazy? Or
It's
like, if you
wild.
could just control your kid, okay, like, let me
Yeah.
get on that. Yeah, especially
Yeah.
like because you have young kids like I do, like,
Yes.
okay, because that totally works. But I now appreciate that my husband will challenge me on things. Like
Mhm.
it's like, this is crazy, but he's the first person that I've ever compromised with, like so much so that it's like in our wedding vows. Like we joke about it now, but he is strong enough to be like, I think you're a crazy person. He
Yeah.
doesn't say that, but like initially
Right.
that's what I heard, which like the clause came out even more.
Mhm.
But I feel like so many people now talk about, oh, that's a trauma response. Oh, that's a trauma response. Oh, that's a trauma response. I'm sure you know because you're a therapist, like how it's like overused or, different words
Yeah.
like conflict or narcissism or all of these things are just, everyone's a therapist now. I mean, I don't know why you went to
Yeah.
school with it. You could just
Yeah,
like
I know.
get on
What a waste
Instagram
of
and do
time.
that. Um, can you talk about a trauma response and what that actually is?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So our brains cannot tell the difference between perception and reality, right? Like if I started describing to you your most favorite dessert right now, I could describe like this warm, ooey gooey chocolate brownie and it's warm and it has a scoop of ice cream on top. Like your mouth would start to salivate because it can't tell that that's not sitting in front of you. Like if you're really focusing on what I'm saying and how I'm describing it, your body is going to have this visceral reaction
What's
to it
happening?
because it feels like it's in front of you. Yes, mine too, just thinking about it. The same is true of trauma, right? So if I've been through a situation in which my brain perceived there to be a threat, okay, that could be emotional harm, that could be a car accident, that could be, anything that my brain perceived as a threat, it's now wired differently the second that happens, right? And so moving forward, any reminder of that, any time that my brain feels similar to the way it did then, it is going to have a trauma response. Okay. So, a lot of us, especially like in early childhood when we're having traumatic events, we find ways to cope with that sensation. When my body feels triggered by something scary, life threatening, I find ways to, even if it's not effective, try to navigate that. So for me, that looked like a lot of emotional monitoring as a child because I had perceived threat when I did not feel safe around certain adults because there was, hostile, volatile language, whatever it might have been, intimidating body language. Um, my brain was like, okay, now you have to be on high alert of everybody's emotional state at all times. Okay, so you need to know who's in a bad mood and what you can do to fix it. And so as an adult, I was finding with my husband, like I still struggle with this, to be honest. Like, if he's in a bad mood, I don't know how to navigate being around him because my trauma response is to fix it. Like, I need to apologize for something. I need to make this better. I need to like cook and clean and show up and be productive because that's how my brain tried to cope with it as a child. And so now I have to be like, he's allowed to have a bad day and it doesn't have to mean anything about me. But as a child, I made it mean everything about me as a false sense of control over the situation and trying to get everyone back to a regulated state. And so we all have various trauma responses when that gets triggered within us.
Yeah, that's definitely mine. Like the
Yeah.
hypervigilance and like being
Hmm.
like it's wild because there's two pendulums of this or like two sides of it, right? Because one side of it is you're like, wow, I feel really in control of like me. Like look how good I am at like regulating. You're not regulating anything. Like let's be honest. Like you are so like hyper aware, like on high alert that you're just like on running on adrenaline and then like the crash happens, right? And like all of these things. And it took me a while to and like you, like I've done a lot of work to like get through it, but there are still days that I'm like, are you okay? Like, why are you mad? Like, what's going on? Like, why are you being weird? And he's like, I just didn't get enough sleep last night. I'm like,
Yeah,
whatever. And I'm like, are you
right.
sure? What is wrong
Yeah.
with you? Right. But in my head, I'm like, all of these other things. And I'm like, okay, get it together.
Yeah.
He's not going to lie to you and be like, oh, I just didn't get enough sleep or, I'm cranky about whatever. Like, God forbid he have a bad day too, because I
Yeah.
can't have a bad day. So you definitely can't have a bad day, right? You know what I mean? There's so
Yep.
many, like everyone is walking around with their own story and their own head, and like everyone's body, brain included, is completely different, which
Hmm.
is like wild. So thank you for dissecting that and like, here's what it is, here's how it shows
Yeah,
up. Like
of course.
everyone's not perfect. So
Hmm.
speaking of bodies and everyone being different, can you talk to like PMDD? Like
Yeah.
what is going on?
Oh man. So after my first
Wait,
child,
first, like what is it? I like
okay.
how do you find out? Because people are like,
Yes,
wait, what's that mean?
absolutely. Okay. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It falls under the category of mood disorders. It is a extreme negative reaction to hormone changes. Like for me, I mean, I've been having symptoms of this since I was a teenager and got my first period. But I didn't know that,
Okay.
right? Like, because first of all, it's really hard for women to break through the stigma of like, oh, she needs to change her tampon. Oh, are you PMSing? Oh, da, 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 right. There's so much stigma around the mood swings that are known to happen around hormones that it makes it really hard to seek treatment because I was digging my heels in with everything that I had that's not what it was. I'm not PMSing, right? I'm just crabby or my husband's making me mad or da da da, right? It's like all these other things. Well, life events that impact your hormones, like giving birth and pregnancy and all of that, right, trigger PMDD to become even more exacerbated. So after my first child, not only was I having a terrible time postpartum with my mental health, like postpartum anxiety through the roof, could not sleep, intrusive thoughts galore, like was just really struggling. And so I go to therapy because of that. And then, I'm talking to my therapist about like feeling suicidal. And I'm like, I haven't felt this way since I was like 18 years old. What's happening to me? And I'm processing through this with her, and she has me start tracking my cycle. And she's like, okay, this has been 3 months in a row that the 7 to 14 days before menstruation, you are a bear. Like irritability, I can't even tell you the way I want to rip my own skin off, the suicidal thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, the agitation, on edge, high anxiety, cramps, I mean, physical symptoms too, right? Were debilitating. I felt like there were 2 weeks out of every single month where I could not function. I did not feel like myself whatsoever. And so with her, I ended up on, working with a psychiatrist and getting on SSRIs and doing the whole Prozac thing for about 9 months. But then I'm like, I just feel like a zombie. So I got off of them. I got pregnant with my second child, and the symptoms were gone because pregnancy, you're going through all different kinds of hormones. And then postpartum round two, which he's not even 6 months old yet. So this is all very fresh. It came back with an even greater vengeance. I mean, the mood swings have been otherworldly. I'm not joking when I say I would go from like laughing so hard I'm crying to a full out rage where I literally have to remove myself from the room because I feel like I'm going to do something that is not only like against all of my morals and values, but like very out of character for me.
Mhm.
And so it has been debilitating. And now I'm on this whole journey of working with a functional medicine doctor, because I refuse to go back on medications. Like I just, pharmaceuticals only get us so far. And I refuse to be a zombie. Like in turn, I just don't want to trade one set of symptoms for another. And so now I'm working with a functional medicine doctor. She has completely revamped my nutrition, and is looking at all of my symptomology, like down to what's going on with my fingernails, down to like, she asked me if my butthole itches. Like, I mean, we've talked about everything.
I love
And
it.
she's got me on a plan now where I'm doing an elimination diet. I'm cutting out like certain food groups and seeing what that does because hormone health, I mean, everything starts in the gut, right? And so taking back power over my nutrition when sweets and sugars and all that stuff was a coping skill for me for so long, it was really making everything worse. I'm now coming to find out. So it's been an incredible journey. I don't wish it upon anyone to go through PMDD, but I am finding the more that I share about it, other women are seeking, like, wow, I think this answers a lot of my questions because I don't necessarily feel like I have anxiety or depression, but there is this like substantial period every month where I'm struggling so bad and I don't know why. And it's because we're having an extreme negative reaction to those hormone changes in our body.
Yeah, I remember when you posted, you guys, I did not want sugar to be the reason, but
It's so sad.
I know. Oh my gosh. Okay, so it's something super related, but like unrelated. There is an anesthesiologist I follow online. I have no idea how I found his content. Dr. Sud. I don't know if you know who that
Mm-mm.
is.
No.
Um, but he does a lot of, I think a lot of his content for Instagram comes from TikTok because like there's a lot of
Okay.
stitches and stuff. But specifically for women, like he's kind of like dove into like women's health and symptoms and things of the sort, and how when you're a teenager, oh, you're on your period. Okay, well, it's just then you're menstruating. Oh, you have anxiety. It's probably because it's that time of the month, or a lot of things are dismissed because of that. So when you said, I didn't want it to be because I was PMSing, I'm like, yeah, I agree. And people are like, oh, yeah. And so then there's two sides of that too, right? Like I can hide behind my irritability or being crazy because I'm PMSing, right? Like I can just flippantly use that as an excuse. But then like the other side of it, yeah, like I can just say, oh, you're just having a hard time because you're on your period. Well, like
Yeah.
there's other things that are going on. So I find like the functional doctor, like that part of it really fascinating because you're 100% right. You're just trading one symptom for another and
Yeah.
like a big picture thing. My husband and I have been talking about this and he's like, I feel like I need like a body manager that like manages like all of the different, because he started like acupuncture and getting
Yeah.
massages regularly and going to the chiropractor and like all of these other things. And he's one of those people that's like, before you start adding things, let's take things away so that way you can kind of figure out like, okay, what is affecting what when you're talking about like your elimination diet. So I find that very fascinating because I think that I'm starting to see more of that,
Mm-hmm.
more of like okay, the functionality and an
Yes.
elimination diet, but not because necessarily, like, granted, weight loss may be a reason, like, may be a side
Yeah.
effect,
Yeah.
but
Right.
that's not necessarily the reason why. And
Mhm.
going back to like the gut health and how
Yeah.
crazy it is, like what's actually going on in there, how much it actually does affect your body. I
Yeah.
don't know, like everything's kind of connected.
100%. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that, but yeah, like turns out everything's trying to work together in there.
Really? Oh, how long did
It's
you take to
bizarre.
like hear, like learn that?
It's wild.
It is wild, right? Like you don't think that your fingernail is connected to like what's going on in your brain or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it must be a trauma response, probably.
Yeah. It's probably just a trauma response. That's got to be it.
I'm gonna ask you like how your fingernails are like in 3 months.
Yeah.
Okay, now I am like kind of curious. Like your fingernails, like are they brittle? Are they like super strong? Are they
Yeah, no, I have pretty fragile fingernails and I have like the white spots on them. And I don't know what that means yet, but apparently it's important because she had me literally like I mean she has me like analyzing all of my poop. Like she wants intimate details about all the things.
you're
It's
like, hey,
pretty
wait a minute. Like wine and dine me first.
yeah, I'm like, okay, lady, like just get all the I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy. But I mean, the fact that it's so thorough because this is what I do. Like when I have a new therapy client start or even a coaching client, I will say to them, I'm not interested in teaching you how to cope. You already know how to journal, you know how to meditate, you know how to do deep breathing. I'm not giving you any more band-aids. Okay. So if that's why you're here, like that's not what I do. I said, I'm going to get into why you are the way that you are, what you've been through that caused these things, and how we can make a plan moving forward. Like I just have no interest in temporary solutions anymore. And I think that's what pharmaceuticals are. You're slapping a band-aid, an expensive band-aid that comes with a lot of side effects, right? Like from my perspective, there are very few mental health scenarios in which a person should be on pharmaceuticals forever, right? Like there are very few struggles that would require that. My problem is when I meet people and they're like, I've been on Prozac for 12 years. Da, da, da." I'm like, you don't even know what you're like off of it. Like, I, I love that you think that it's working, but who are you without it? Because you were prescribed it 12 years ago because you were struggling. But if it takes about 6 months on average to ramp up in your system and be at top effectiveness, and then you get off of it, it's probably going to take you at least a year to see who you are without it. Like, why are we just blindly trusting? This is where I'm like, you have to advocate for yourself. Like, why are you just blindly popping this pill every day without question, without wondering what would I be like without it, you know? But that's where deep healing has to come in. And if you're not there for that and you'd rather just pop the pill, like there's nothing I can do to support you at that point. Like you've made your decision, you know, and I'm not afraid to tell clients that.
Okay, I was not I never thought our conversation was gonna go like in this way, but can we
Yeah,
talk about that?
of
Because like
course.
I have stepmoms that I've coached or even just friends that are like, well, if I start on Prozac, if I start on Xanax, or if I start on any sort of SSRI, I'm on it forever. And I don't want to do that because whatever, like I'm scared of what's going to happen. Like, let's start there. I don't want to go through like trying to find out my dosage. The job that I have, I can't function like at half mast or I can't be foggy or I can't do this. I don't know what kind of crazy person, so to speak, I'm gonna even more crazy potentially like turn
Yeah.
into like when I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. So can you talk to me like why do you think that? And I agree with you, but like why do you think that? And what
Yeah.
because you're licensed in this and
Yeah.
you've got like the degree behind you.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that that is common knowledge that you just like go on it for a little bit. So can you kind
Yeah.
of talk to us about that?
So I always use the analogy of like taking a medication is like grease on your bike chain. Okay. You still pedal, you still balance, you still steer, right? The medication just greases that chain to like get you going. I don't have to grease my chain every time I get on the bike. It's like it was a temporary, like, I have to do this every once in a while, right? When I need a little extra support because it's getting stuck. And so I'm the one in control. I'm the one putting in all of the effort to do the healing, to figure out why I am the way that I am, get to the root of things. It's just grease on your bike chain. And so the idea that you're just greasing that chain every single day without stopping to be like, how does my bike function if I don't? It's probably going to be just fine. And so I think I would encourage people, like, do I think that postpartum after my first son, when I was figuring out everything, that I needed it for those 9 months? I probably could have done it without it, but I was willing to explore that. And then the second that I was like, okay, I've got a grip on things. My husband has learned more about my mental health. He's a great support. I have all of these other like resiliency factors in place to take care of myself. I have a plan. Now I'm coming off of it, right? I'm like, it was never the intention to be on it forever. I knew come time when we'd want to have a second child, I certainly wasn't going to be on it then. We just don't know enough that I felt comfortable to be on it. Even if doctors are saying it's okay, I was like, nope, I'm not risking that. Um, so I just want people to get curious and feel empowered that like that is not your only solution. And just because you're one primary doctor who took a class that lasted about 15 minutes on mental health throughout their like medical education, prescribed it to you does not mean that's your only option. It's just like Western medicine is so heavily focused on pharmaceuticals. And I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, but like if you look at who owns these companies and who also runs the insurance companies and like why they want you on the medications in the first place, it's to benefit them. It's not to benefit you, right? It's like sedation, right? And so I just want people to get curious and start asking some questions and get a second opinion. And, you know, I think even a lot of therapists encourage people to go on medications, and I'm the opposite. I'm like, that's great if you need a little temporary aid, but that is not our goal forever. And I applaud my clients who are like, you know what, I think I can do it without, and I don't need to do that. Or I'll encourage somebody if they're insightful enough to like find a medication they can take as needed, right? There's a lot of anxiety medications that you can just take when you feel a panic attack coming on, and you don't have to consume something every day just because,
I
right?
didn't
Like
even know that.
most people don't need that.
I did not even know that you could get like something like
Yeah.
if you feel something coming on.
Yeah.
So kind of like an EpiPen. Like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
having an allergic reaction. Let's just,
Exactly. Exactly.
man, if we could get like EpiPens for panic attacks,
Yeah.
it'd be kind of cool. Like somebody's having one and you just like give them a shot. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist either, but I mean, Jaclyn, there's so much money in that.
So much. They don't want us to get
Wait,
healthy,
if you can, wait, you have to see like, if you're listening to this, like you should have seen like our eye rolls.
Yes, I know. I know it. But you think about like, okay, when you shop at like Aldi, for example, Aldi or Trader Joe's, you're going to get a lot of foods that don't have dyes, that don't have preservatives. It's because those are European countries. The company is from there, right? The company is from Europe, and they have food standards because they have universal health care. So they're motivated for their citizens to stay healthy. And we don't have that here. We have private insurance. And so there's no motivation. So that's why we see red dyes in all of our foods. Like, tell me why fruit snacks, for example, need dyes in them when there's already juice added in that is coloring them. But that's what our kids are constantly consuming. And we're seeing this rise in things like ADHD and behaviorally. Like, I've watched the difference in my toddler when I cut out dyes from his diet, and all of that processed food made some of those things myself, which is super fucking easy, by the way, to make some of those swaps. It feels really intimidating. And it took me 2 years of his life to finally start trying to like make some swaps. But our system is designed to keep us sick and dependent on the system. And it's really unfortunate.
You are not the first therapist that I've had on this podcast that we talked about that. And I think when I was talking to him, we kept it, I think that part of it was off camera. But yeah, he was like, I was in practice, like in an office, and I was charging X amount of dollars, but I only got like 25% of the amount that I was charging because the rest of it went to like insurance companies. And so I
Yep.
just went into private practice by myself, and it
Yeah.
was scary, but like now I get to help people, but I'm actually compensated for like what I'm doing and not just like pissing it away essentially to like somebody else. And I'm like, yeah. So yeah, oh my gosh, that is something that I love about you is that you're willing to go against the grain. Like I said with that podcast that I was like, I should just fast forward this one, but I'm like, no, listen to it. Like you like her, you actually like her. Like you like listen to this. Like let's have a dialogue. I'm like listening and like responding to
Yes.
like stupid things you would say. And it, all right, yeah, maybe that's valid. Like I haven't talked to my husband about it, but like, listen. So my friend Jaclyn is a therapist, and guess what she said? You'll be like, what?
Yes.
But I like that you're like, let's have a dialogue about it, but you're not like in your face, like this is my way and this is the only way, and you're kind of an idiot if you do something different. I like that you are like, hey, maybe we should explore this. Or
Mhm.
if that doesn't work for you, totally cool. Let's
Yeah.
try this or let's try that. And I like that you're honest about if you're coming here for a band-aid, I'm not your girl. Like I didn't come here to give you a band-aid or to give you another coping skill. That's like my thing too, like pretty sarcastic, but I'm going to give you a hard truth, but it's going to be delivered with like touch of sarcasm. Like I feel like that goes a long way
Yeah.
when you can add in like a little bit of humor. But I didn't come here to be like, yeah, you know what, you're right, everyone else sucks and you're doing the
Yeah.
right thing. And that's
Exactly.
hard to do, like on this side of it,
Mhm.
because you want, like, I genuinely want to help the stepmoms that I'm with, but if I'm telling you something that you don't want to hear, I'm like,
Mhm.
I usually will say, this might not be something that you want to hear, but
Right.
I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like, and I wish somebody would have told me this. Insert whatever.
Exactly. Right. And we can validate, but like we're obsessed with validation to the point where it's become detrimental. Like you can't, like
You have
not
to
all of
validate
your
me
feelings are
first.
valid. Yeah. Like, but
Mhm.
not all of your feelings are valid. Like I'm going to call you out and be like, that's not a true feeling. That's a story you're telling yourself that's not serving you. Right. So that I'm going to tell you when no, that's not valid.
Because your brain can't tell the difference.
No.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could just squeeze you. Okay. I could literally talk to you all day
Yeah,
long.
I know.
Where can everyone find you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. The Anxious Therapist on Instagram is the best place to find me.
Oh,
That's also the
hilarious.
title of my podcast. I have hundreds of episodes. They're short little tidbits of, if you like to be challenged. I'm a proponent for tough love. I like that. Because I think too many people are taking it too easy on us, and we gotta rein it in and challenge ourselves a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you offer coaching and you offer therapy, which I think is great. Can
Yeah.
you tell people the difference between the two in case they don't know?
Yes. Yeah. So as a therapist, I don't promote those services at all. I'm in the online space as a coach, right? But I have the knowledge and experience, and yes, that is my career. But if you're going to therapy, it's because you want to dig into potentially things from the past and process them, get into like what you were feeling at the time and the thoughts you were having, and right, explore that. If you're seeking coaching, it's probably because you've already done some of that. You've done, whether on your own or with other people, you're like, I've explored, I feel like I have a good sense of why I am the way that I am, but I don't know how to like bridge the gap between where I am and where I want to be. And that's where I come in as a coach. It's like most of my clients are very insightful. They're like, this is what I've been through. This is the behavior that I walked away from that event with. And these are the changes I want to make, but I don't know how to go about doing it. And so that's where coaching comes in. Coaching is very action oriented, where therapy is going to be a lot more processing.
I feel like you have like the best of both worlds because you've
Yeah.
got all of the knowledge. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for this conversation. You are such a
Yes.
wealth of knowledge. Like this is so fun.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was amazing.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world, and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.